Allegations of sexual harassment
has been
now
fired,
suspending him.
forced to apologize.
2 months, more than 24 prominent men facing accusations of sexual misconduct and harassment. With all these allegations of disturbing behavior, it prompts the question, how do you raise good men? We start with a panel of young boys.
What does it mean to be a good man?
Treat people fairly, no matter what skin color or gender.
Yeah, to open doors for women. You have to respect.
This presentation will be focused around the works of Freud and Foucault and how the theories which have been created in the past can be translated into modern phenomenons or social movements such as the Me Too movement.
The problem is that from a young age, girls are taught to stay quiet and be nice, and that boys are stronger and somehow we are less than. That is why it is hard for us to speak out. And even when we do speak out, people don't believe us. But there is power in numbers, and good for us, good for everyone speaking out. I want to say thank you for everybody for speaking out.
The main theories in which we will explore are the medicalization of sex and concepts such as penis envy, which lead to, or at least contributed to, society holding a taboo outlook towards the topic of sex. The repressive hypothesis, proposed by Foucault, which states that although it appears that the topic of sex has been repressed through scholars such as Freud, the willingness of these scholars to discuss these issues is really making sex less taboo. And last but not least, power relations and how the concentration of power that has been primarily concentrated with the male gender, and how this contributed both to the silencing of women in relation to the reporting of sexual misconduct, as well as empowering them to speak out on the topic. To begin, what is meant by the over-medicalization of sex? It was stated by Foucault in the 17th century that there was very little secrecy about sex. One was able to discuss the topic of sex as well as engage in the act with little to no resistance for choosing to do so. But this would eventually change. This change began under Queen Victoria, under whom sexuality became a more confined issue. Sex became something that was only supposed to be conducted for the purpose of reproduction and was taken over by the conjugal family. This attempt in the Victoria era to make sex more of a taboo issue can be seen as the starting point for the over-medicalization/overanalyzation of sex. The issue of sex was not discussed on a major scale until the work of Sigmund Freud, as can be seen in his article titled Femininity, in which through the use of psychoanalysis, Freud proposes a theory which states that women in their younger age see a male family's penis for the first time, and they develop penis envy due to the fact that they were not born with one, an envy which will only be satisfied when they give birth to a son. Although in a literal sense, the concept of a woman wanting a physical penis is laughable, penis envy, however, in the context of wanting the same rights and freedoms as males, is a concept which can be investigated further. For centuries, men have been viewed as the dominant gender, holding rights to benefits such as the right to vote, the right to own property, as well as the right to work in the field of their choice. These are clearly rights and freedoms which women will be envious of, and thus penis envy can be looked at not as the desire for a physical penis, as Freud had theorized, but rather the attempt to gain a hold of power which was commonly held by the male gender. With scholars such as Freud attempting to overanalyze sex through the creation of theories such as literal penis envy, we are able to see an attempt to make sex more of a taboo within our society and thus maintain the power relation which existed within our society at the time. In switching our attention back to the work of Foucault and his repressive hypothesis, we are introduced to a theory which essentially states that through the over-medicalization/overanalyzation that was examined earlier in this presentation, we are not silencing or making sex more taboo, but rather continuing the dialogue on the topic and thus making it more of a mainstream issue. Although this seems to be a logical conclusion to draw, I argue that this is not the case. The main counterpoint to this theory which needs to be addressed is the role of the state. In modern society, power is entirely vested with the state. This power includes the ability to decide what is or is not regulated within the state, from issues such as who has the right to marry who and who is allowed to have relations with who. The state has the final say on what occurs within its boundaries. This control of regulation that is held by the state shows exactly why Foucault's repressive hypothesis does not work. Although public opinion can be swayed by further dialogue, with the state holding the final say on what is repressed, it must be said then that the only person who has a say in what is in fact repressed is the state. This outlook of a repressed society is prominent within the ongoings of the Me Too movement. With the issue of sex being highly regulated within the United States, people have essentially been silenced from speaking out on issues relating to sex. The Me Too movement is a social movement which has helped with the shift of power away from dominant forces and given a voice to a primarily unempowered group.
Social movements such as the Me Too movement don't just emerge out of thin air. The beginning of this particular movement can be traced back to a concentration of power with the male gender. Within his article of History of Sexuality, Foucault speaks about the fin de scale society in France, in which doctors were all treated as telling scribes on the topic of sex, which during this time was limited private discussion between conjugal family members and one's doctor, who held supreme power as one of the few people who were able to discuss and analyze the topic of sex. Fast forward to modern times, and we are able to identify where this concentration of power lies. With many positions of power in the fields of politics, business, and a larger number of other fields, it cannot be argued that power is solely vested within the male gender. This power has placed women in a precarious position in relation to sex. Throughout history, with men being the only ones to be able to discuss sex, women in modern society have effectively been muzzled when faced with the issue of reporting sexual misconduct. This muzzling can be looked at as a straw that broke the camel's back, with many women becoming tired of being repressed and deciding to speak out, thus leading to the birth of the Me Too movement. The Me Too movement has been an extensive social movement in the mainstream media since October 2017, after allegations against Harvey Weinstein arose. Women and men across the globe were given a voice who have been targets of sexual violence and harassment and were encouraged to come forward to share their stories of being sexually assaulted and harassed. The hashtag #MeToo trended on Twitter after celebrity Alyssa Milano tweeted, "If all the women who have been sexually harassed or assaulted wrote Me Too as a status, we might be able to give people a sense of the magnitude of the problem." The problem that the celebrity is referring to is how in this day and age, sexual violence has been extensively normalized. We chose to use the Me Too movement as an example of power because it shows how leaders, directors in this instance, are supposed to take care of their employees, actors in this instance, but with the belief of having power gives a person the right and power to do things. In this instance, sexual assault in many different ways. Foucault claims that power seeks to structure subjects' choices in ways that bring their behavior in line with the needs and desires of governments. Using Weinstein as an example, the allegations of him claimed he would be more likely to give you a part in a movie if you slept with him.
Another example of power relations and sexual misconduct that has recently taken over the mainstream media is the court case of sexual predator Larry Nassar. Nassar assaulted 156 girls over the course of 30 years while working as the coach for both the USA gymnastics team as well as the Michigan University gymnastics team. He was sentenced to 175 years in prison for the crimes that he committed. However, men are criticizing the female judge who tried the case for being too mean.
Writing this mumbo jumbo doesn't help you, sir.
Our man-believing, women-doubting world enabled a gold-plated sexual assault ring, writes Patella Dvorak of the Washington Post. What does it say about our society when victims do come forward and they are automatically met with skepticism and doubt and treated as liars until proven true? Asked the prosecutor, Assistant Attorney General Angela Pavlidis. Foucault, 1977, claims that discipline is characterized by micropowers that shape human subjects in preferred ways. Foucault argues that every bit of our being is shaped through the exercise of these micropowers, which have caused this brainwashing into believing that men in power can do what they please without repercussions. Relating this back to the Nassar case, his position as the national team doctor enabled him to use his power to conduct cumulative criminal acts of sexual assault. We are told from a young age to trust doctors, having our behavior shaped by teachers, parents, and guardians, and these micropowers standardized our behavior. In this case, Nassar was able to molest hundreds of gymnasts while using his power to convince them what he was doing wasn't wrong.
Foucault's work helps scholars understand modern configurations of power by alerting them on how the behavior of active subjects is shaped and contoured in ways often hidden from view, but that have very real effects. We can see this by looking back at our examples of the Me Too movement in the Larry Nassar case, and are able to understand how power relations and the concentration of power is primarily concentrated with the male gender, and how these power relations and concentration of power has contributed to both the silencing of reporting sexual misconduct and empowering victims to speak out on the topic. Allegations of many others show that it is time for us to see this global issue for what it really is: heinous, senseless, and reprehensible acts of violence against other human beings. No money, power, gender, job, or shiny gold statue on a shelf will ever excuse or erase what these people have done and continue to do to other people every day. And at the same time, it shouldn't take high-profile celebrity scandals and a hashtag on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to force people to take the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault seriously. Sexual assault and sexual harassment is not breaking news, so why do we keep treating it like it is?